Inside the Manosphere is the documentary that everybody's talking about on Netflix at the moment, and I wasn't going to watch it because I knew that I'd find it really triggering. And I did find it really triggering, but it also brought up other things for me and other questions that were not answered in that documentary. And so in this video, I wanted to talk about that to address some of those questions. And I want to find out what you think, if you've seen it, if you've experienced being in the presence of a man like that. I know I have, and it makes you feel powerless. And so I found listening to some of the ways that these men were thinking about women, like their transactions, like they're useful. One of the guys said, yeah, it's really nice to have her around. She's been very helpful. And it was interesting because he really did see her as someone that would do things for him, while she was trying so hard to love him and be what she thought he wanted him to be. He wanted her to be. And it's very obvious that these people were seeing the relationship in two very different ways. And I found it really heartbreaking to watch that she was trying to be loved and she was trying to be loving. And he was saying, I would like to have multiple wives, for example. And she was saying, oh, I don't know. Yeah, we'll see how that works out. I'm not really sure. Essentially abandoning herself in order to keep this relationship alive, even lying about how she felt about it to the camera. And you could tell how uncomfortable she was. And so I found it really sad to watch, knowing that both myself and so many of my clients have done exactly that with so many different relationships in the past. But it was very illuminating, and it enabled me to see particular men that I've met in my life very clearly, actually, and helped me to see how far I've come. So that was an interesting part of that, about it. But the question that was not answered for me, and they touched on briefly by looking into these men's pasts. The question was, how do we prevent boys and men from feeling so insecure within themselves that they have to find these quick, very immoral ways of getting that hit of validation or being seen in a way? Because essentially all of the men in that program were deeply wounded and deeply insecure, and you kind of got that when he explored their past, the fact that they'd all come from broken homes, the father had been absent, and that worried me as a single parent to a son. How do I protect Noah from viewing women that way? How do I protect him from seeing relationships that way? And it wasn't addressed, that question. And so it was the one thing that I thought was missing. I thought Louis Theroux was the perfect person to do that interview and to do those interviews, because he didn't come across as judgmental, really, more curious. At the same time, he said what he thought, and he was calm, and he wasn't threatened really by the men who really did try to threaten him, tried to belittle him like they tried to belittle the women. And it was interesting how every single time one of those men felt exposed, one of them in particular, whenever he felt exposed, he went into rage. And rage, underneath rage, is often grief. So, I mean, knowing that, I could see that he was being incredibly defensive, and his facade of I don't give a F what you think of me was very clearly a persona, a way that he's learned to deal and distance himself from rejection. But interestingly, his reaction to the documentary has been huge. Like, his reaction has been full of rage, full of, no, you're not seeing me right, and I don't really care what you think. He's done a whole video which is very contradictory, of like saying, I am really upset about all this hate, but I don't give a shit what you think about me. And there are so many of the people that I've met through the work that I do who have found themselves in the situation where they are trying to accommodate one of these men. And I think the problem is that someone who is emotional, empathetic, sensitive, goes into a relationship hoping to get that reciprocity, if that's the right word. I never know how to say that word. But someone who is essentially maybe bordering more towards a narcissist or narcissistic or highly, highly avoidant at the very least, they tend to be more transactional. So these two ways of operating don't work in a relationship unless they both accept it, completely accept it. And my question really is, did those women really accept it? I don't believe they did. I do not believe they did. The other interesting point about it was that some of the points that the men were making were not wrong. You know, like the system in the world is set up to make a lot of people fail. It's not fair. It's not just. But they're so close to sort of getting that and seeing a problem, but then their method of trying to fix it is something so immoral and so crap that essentially puts them in a state of shame again. So rather than like going through that discomfort and working hard in a way to sort of do something good in the world, and at one point Louis asked one of the guys, like, why don't you just try and be a good person? Why don't you try and help people? And he was like, something like, well, if I just did that, I wouldn't get anywhere in my life and I wouldn't have the money that I have now and I wouldn't be able to live the way that I live. And essentially, it was an incredibly self-centered way of viewing the world. But he did sit with the question, why am I not a good person? I don't know. He kind of went, good question. I don't know. I don't really give a fuck. Like that's like his go-to response. I don't give a fuck, sort of thing. And yeah, it was triggering to watch because, like I say, I've met people like that, and you just feel powerless as a woman. There was a horrible part where they did a podcast with women there, and it was all set up to make them look stupid. If you ever meet a man who's deliberately making you feel small, asking you questions that you can't answer, trying to make you look dumb, they are not your person. They are not the right person for you. That will never feel okay. If someone is asking you to do things for them, like you're their mother, that's not your person. If somebody is speaking badly of you, trying to control you, by saying you can do this, you can't do this. It's okay for me to sleep with other women, but it's not okay for you to be with other men. Like that's not your person. I mean, these were quite extreme examples of incredibly insecure men, but there's obviously a lesser degree of that people have met, which is still just as damaging and disruptive for someone's self-esteem. But yeah, like I say, the question that wasn't answered was how do we protect young boys and boys growing up from viewing the world in this way. I spoke to my therapist as I was watching it, and she was like, you give praise when praise is due, not whenever the hell, all the time for no apparent reason. And I was thinking as well, like there was a part where the mother was interviewed. She didn't seem embarrassed. She didn't seem worried. She kind of said, no, you shouldn't say that a couple of times, but she defended him a lot of the time. And some people would say, well, that's what a mother does. But honestly, if my son was behaving like that, I would be absolutely mortified. And I would, it's about having consequences for their actions at the end of the day. And I wonder if that was the missing thing, or if things were brushed under the carpet, emotions weren't validated and things like that. It seems like there was an imbalance and a lot of chaos. It looked like those upbringings were really chaotic, emotionally chaotic. One of the guys was saying his mum would have fits of rage and things. And it wasn't just about having a single parent home, for example. It was about the energy within the home. And so I think that's one of the things that they could have made more of, like making those points really clear, or doing a comparison with other broken homes with men who didn't end up like that or something. But I think it's a really important question that we should be asking more in schools and, in general, so that we can protect men and women from this kind of way of thinking. I did think they made a really good point about how the Manosphere essentially hypes up men to thinking and feeling that they can be and do anything they want, but is kind of set up to make them fail. And so it's really sad. It pries on vulnerable men. And, vulnerable men created it in the first place. And it takes facts about life that are true that people feel from a pain point, like life is hard, I can't get to where I want to go, I'm struggling financially, I want to do more, I don't know how, I've been thrown into this world where I don't have enough. And then they see these men saying, you can do anything you want, you can have anything you want, you just got to do what I do, you got to think like I think. But the reality is that a lot of these men who are following this ideology will never get to the place that these other men will, because those men are blooming taking from them as they go. They take money that these guys invest into whatever systems they do, and they end up losing half the time because the world is unstable like that. So it's horrible that these men think, oh, I hate the world and I want it to be better, so I'm gonna say fuck the system and I'm gonna create my own wealth, and then become the exact thing that they hate and then ruin other people's lives. That's what's really sad about it. And I think it's creating a world where people are just driven by shame and sorrow. And it's really heartbreaking, not just for women. Obviously, it's dangerous for women to be around somebody who sees them as like a thing or like an asset. It's horrible for those women whose self-esteem must be on the floor to be in that situation. But it's also men who are at risk of their self-esteem like never improving, ever, never getting the true support. I think another thing is that Louis did try and sort of pry a bit more into their sort of like emotional world, their emotional sort of psyche. But I wonder if he thought, I can see the rage that this person has and what they may be capable of, and I'm not going to push it. Because I did wonder, like, could he get under their skin anymore? Could he find out a bit more about what is the emotions like running the show here? And I wonder, like, what stopped them from going further. But yeah, it was very interesting. But like I say, I would like a follow-up or more information how to protect men from growing up in with that ideology, signs to look out for of when they're starting to think that way, things to block on their phones when they're young, just not give them phones or whatever, and how to protect women, how to show them like the signs of somebody who's thinking that way, and what to do if you're trapped in that situation. These were sort of like the unanswered questions, I think, from the documentary. Although I did think it was good, it was insightful, it was just a bit like unanswered questions that I think are really important for us to answer. But yeah, I'd love to know what you think, and if you've ever met anybody like that and how it affected you. I know, like I say, when I've met a man like that and been in that situation, my self-esteem was on the floor, and I felt utterly powerless. I felt like nothing I could say would ever penetrate this person's ego enough for me to be able to feel safe with this person. And yet I perpetually tried to feel safe with that person. And it's very, very confusing. It creates a lot of cognitive dissonance, and it completely fucked my nervous system. So it needs to be made more aware of so that people can protect themselves. But if you have anything that you want to add, I'd love to hear what you think about it. And if you're going through anything similar, or you need some help getting out of a situation like that, or you're recovering from a situation like that, you're in transition, this is what my group coaching is about. It's also where you can ask for one-to-one coaching, and you can check out my other videos, because there's lots of videos on this channel about avoidance. So yeah, and if you've got any other questions, then let me know, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.